Welcome back, Tribe. I have a really interesting one here from CNN. Why the rate of single men in the US looking for dates has declined. Let's see what mainstream has to say.
Last week, I delved here into recent data from the CDC suggesting major problems with regard to the mental health of our adolescents, surges in depression and suicidal ideation, especially true for our girls. This week, I found cause to worry about young men. This headline from The Hill, it caught my eye. Most young men are single. Most young women are not. The story reported that as of 2022, Pew Research Center found 30% of U.S. adults are neither married, living with a partner, nor engaged in a committed relationship. Nearly half of all young adults are single. Now, look at these numbers. 34% of women, twice as many, a whopping 63% of men. What explains that? I pulled the Pew study and I read with interest. Turns out since 2019, the share of single men who say they're looking for dates or a relationship has declined from 61% to 50%. In 2018, 28% of men ages 18 to 30 reported they'd had no sex in the past year, compared with 18% of women of that age. The Hill report said men in their 20s are more likely than women in their 20s to be romantically uninvolved, sexually dormant, friendless, and lonely. They stand at the vanguard of an epidemic of declining marriage, sexuality, and relationships that afflicts all of young America. Among the causes, among the factors, a reliance on social media and online porn. But also...
Here we go. I knew it was going to be boys' fault yet again. It's always a man's fault. It's never on the women at all. There's no sharing the blame here. Of course, adult entertainment has an effect. But let's not kid ourselves and say there's a large pool of qualified women ready to be mothers that men are just fawning for, but they themselves don't have their shit together to be able to get these women. There are not many good women anymore left in the West that you would want to take up to make your bride and start a family with that won't absolutely risk your entire future that you worked for with the long dick of the law behind them enabling everything. It's just the reality of the situation. I understand. On the other side of the fence, the good women that are left also are complaining about where the good men are, that the economic situation in this country is so messed up that the white picket fence, American dream, big yard, dog, 2 kids is all but gone. We've been priced out of our own future. But I'm so sick of hearing how it's men's fault. Let's see. I haven't seen this. This is blind reacting, and I'm gonna assume the quality of men is garbage. It's all men's fault. Men need to step up. It's CNN. Please shock me. Let's see where they put the blame. Hey everyone, if you have a minute, please head over to legionofmen.store and grab yourself some cool merch as well. We have a bunch of limited edition designs, brand new stuff on the way, and all the proceeds go to supporting the channel. We don't want to be sponsored by corporations where we have to submit videos for review, have our speech impeded, or push any products that we don't use. So thank you so much to everybody that goes into the shop. Again, it's legionofmen.store. I'll put it up here for you guys. First time customers get a 10% off, and we have a bunch of great designs by artists from the community that watch the channel and support. They get proceeds as well, a percentage of everything that gets sold. So community funded through and through. And it's no synthetic fibers on any on our products. We're using cotton only, of course. I got your back from all those chemicals from synthetic fibers. Again, appreciate you guys. Let's continue.
More young women are hooking up with each other or dating in...
That's how we're going to gently brush aside that statistic that says more women are actually in a relationship than a surprisingly low amount of men. What could be the reason? They're all getting pumped and dumped by Chad? No. There's just more lesbians nowadays. Okay.
Marrying slightly older men, and heterosexual women are getting more choosy. Other troubling statistics about men come from a 2021 study from the Survey Center for American Life. They found the share of men who have 6 or more close friends, which in 1990 was 55%, by 2021 had shrunk by half. Meanwhile, those with literally 0 close friends, which stood at 3% in 1990, has zoomed to 15%. An expert quoted by The Hill said this disconnect can have catastrophic consequences for young men. Quote, in the worst case scenario, the young American man's social disconnect can have tragic consequences. Young men commit suicide at 4 times the rate of young women. Younger women are largely responsible for rising rates of mass shootings, a trend that some researchers link to their growing social isolation. Well, those words reminded me of a conversation that I had over a year ago right here on CNN with NYU professor Scott Galloway.
But the issue is when you have a group of men, the lower half of attractiveness of men in online dating, which has doubled, now it's about half of relationships, and the top 20% of men in terms of attractiveness get about 60% of the interest, you end up with a group of men that are more prone to conspiracy theory, more prone to misogynistic content, more prone to not believe in climate change. So this is the American.
Come on, man. We just gloss over the fact that he said women become more choosy. Can we ask the question, have women become so choosy that they've become delusional? Are women creating impossible checklists no mere mortal man can possibly live up to? Is society telling women that they deserve that and more? Never settle down, sis. You deserve everything. You are the table. He should take care of you and expect nothing in return. Your presence is what you bring to the table. That's it. I don't need no man. I'm strong and independent. What are men good for anyways? Toxic masculinity, the patriarchy. The list goes on and on. Do you think that has a broad effect on dating? Of everything I've just listed off, what portion of the population of men do you think are most affected or would be most affected? Those high achiever, top percentile, break all the barriers everybody looks up to, attains all the power in society kind of men? Or the lowly, normal, average guy going to his average job, making his average wage, living the average life? Here we go. Tell us more how isolation of men is extremely dangerous, but we won't deal with the symptoms, like society demonizing them.
Story. If it's written with a pen whose ink is failing young men, does not end well. This is an existential crisis, failing young men.
As always, Professor Galloway was prescient. Back with me now is Scott Galloway. He's a professor of marketing at NYU Stern School of Business. He's a serial entrepreneur. He's the host of the Professor G podcast and author of multiple best-selling books, most recently, Adrift, America in 100 Charts. Scott, thanks for returning. Hasn't the advantage always been to those with the looks and or the money? What's changed?
First off, Michael, I just want to say thank you for raising this issue a year ago when a lot of media companies were afraid to talk about this for fear of it being pro-men was somehow being anti-women. Look, this is returning to the natural order of things. For the majority of history, a small percentage of men have had the majority of the mating opportunities. But in America, we decided to make a huge investment in what would probably be the greatest innovation in history, and that is in the middle class. From 1945 to 1947, 7 million men returned from war, were discharged from the service, and we decided to give them the GI Bill, subsidized mortgages. We saw education rates go from 5 to 45%. They were valued, and we had such a strong manufacturing base that you had massive marriage and household formation. And some men were seen as more economically and emotionally viable. And you've seen the reverse happen with the offshoring of much of our manufacturing base, with a society that, quite frankly, doesn't value young men. When we talk about problems with people of color or women, we see it as a systemic societal problem. When we see problems or the stats that you just mentioned, we see it as accountability, or that men just need to level up.
Nailed it.
Married households and household formation are better citizens. They vote. They save at twice the rate. They're less likely to commit crimes. And we have fewer and fewer viable men. We have a dearth of economically and emotionally viable men. But the middle class is an accident. Unless you invest in it, it doesn't happen. Eisenhower decided to invest $500 billion in a national highway project that created tons of jobs. We have, and by the way, the tax rate back then was 91%. We raised money and we redistributed in social programs that made young people more economically viable.
And then, Scott, you toss in the influence of social media and how relationships today, they don't come from, in our era, happenstance and mingling, right? They come from swiping, and that further accelerates this issue. Am I right?
Oh, it's been the chaser to it. I mean, to have an honest conversation about this, we have to be honest. And that is that men and women have different mating criteria. One quarter of men saying economic viability is a key criteria in a mate. 3/4 of women say that is important. And when you're on a two-dimensional format, where now it's 1 and 2 relationships begin online, it used to be 1 and 4 just a few years ago, it gets distilled down to a small number of criteria. Specifically for men, it's does she look attractive? And specifically for men, is he able to signal his ability to garner resources in the future? An average attractive male on Tinder gets swiped less than 1% of the time. And there's 3 men on Tinder for every 1 woman. So you've distilled it, you've taken out one of the key components of mating dynamics, and that is vibe, humor, body language, pheromones, the ability to be, quite frankly, a little bit persistent in the pursuit of a romantic relationship. We have no third places anymore, no places to meet. People aren't going to bars, they aren't sports league, they aren't going to church, they aren't even going to work. So it gets distilled down to very 1 or 2 dimensional attributes. And the reality is women are much choosier than men, and they can apply those screens, and they allocate all of their attention to a small number of men that results in just essentially at the end of the day, a lack of opportunities. Chris Williams summarized it perfectly. He called it the high heels effect. In the last 40 years, more women have graduated from college than men, and they're not interested in mating with non-college grads. They now own more homes, single women, than single men. So what you have is women say they won't date anyone shorter than them, 50% of them. Effectively, what you have metaphorically over the last 40 years is women have been getting taller and taller, and men have been getting shorter and shorter. How many of us have said, I know a ton of great single women, they can't find a date? That's not true. They can't find a date. They can't find a man they find economically or emotionally viable. If we don't make a massive investment in young people and make more economically and emotionally viable men, we're going to see a lack of household formation. We're going to see a decline in the middle class. And we're going to see, quite frankly, just a lot of young men who are terrible citizens.
Told you. Still blames men for everything. Men are economically unviable, which is true to an extent, but it's a half-truth because there are many of us that are economically viable that have absolutely no inkling of marriage whatsoever. We've seen what happened to our predecessors. The marriage laws are out of control. Divorce court is a racket. Child support is a racket. You get absolutely ripped apart. Your family gets taken from you. You lose your house, most likely. Then you get to watch your ex-wife run off with some other dude. No-fault divorces. No recourse for a man. Custody battles are absolutely brutal. It makes no sense for a man today in the West to get married ever. Ever. When you take into consideration the laws, there is no reason to ever get married in the West. Until they change the laws, you should absolutely avoid it at all costs. You can still live together. Again, check common law rules for your state. But besides having children, you can decide to just live together as a married couple and even, quote, get married through the church, but don't involve the state. Involving the state is the worst decision you can make today as a man. Now, once they rectify that issue, we have to move into issue number 2. The quality of women today has dramatically decreased in terms of what a, quote, traditional marriage-minded man is looking for. The fact is we don't want high body counts. Hypersexualization is at an all-time high. Instagram pages alone are disgusting. What is getting posted on there and deemed acceptable by society. Women themselves don't even want to have kids or claim they don't. They prioritize their careers. They think money's more important. They're chasing plaques on the wall, promotions, and career the way a man would. None of these things are important to a man when it comes to searching for a partner. So even if we take into account the small shrinking sliver of economically viable men, of those viable men, they're checked out. They're done. They're either going overseas. They probably nabbed a foreign woman in their local area. They're living very traditional lives with non-Western women. This is from my personal experience, my friend group, and other men that I have met from around the world or successful that were based in the United States. Almost all of them were dating foreign women. I have rarely seen a successful man in America dating an American, a traditional Western woman. I'm telling you, it's very rare to see if the man's really successful. Now, this is the elephant in the room we're not talking about. As for the shrinking middle class, what's left of those relationships today is essentially two people coming together as a last resort for tax breaks and just to fit into society and not end up being alone collecting dogs and cats and wanting to have progeny. That's really it. It's like a social stigma. So women are settling with men that obviously aren't their first choice. You're already getting off to a rocky relationship. The man they're probably settling down for is a little beta Bob, nice guy, software developer, I'm the luckiest man in the world type of guy who's willing to overlook her history, her past, which therefore makes him, in her eyes, on a deep level, unattractive. So they're already on a rocky marriage, rocky relationship. She may or may not give him kids. And then you have these deeply unsatisfied marriages / relationships that end up nowhere in divorce, reading stories on Reddit about how they're in a dead bedroom, or my wife doesn't love me, or I feel invisible in the house, or I'm not attracted to my husband, and on the stories go. Marriage for convenience and social acceptance. That's really what's left today. With the divorce rate being over 50% and over 80% of that being initiated by women, I mean, it's common sense why any man worth his salt would just throw out the entire institution.
Is the answer to fix this economically, and who will champion this conversation? You felt obliged to compliment me at the outset because we had engaged on this a year ago, and here I am revisiting it. And I read into that the fact that you think that it's politically incorrect even to have this dialogue.
When you're seen as advocating for men because of the 300,000-year head start we've had, it seems somehow as anti-female. There's a lot of very unfortunate misogyny online that is masquerading as being pro-men. A lot of TikTok celebrities who talk about advocating for men, it's just thinly veiled misogyny. What do we need? We need more freshman seats in colleges. We need a massive investment in vocational training. We need to figure out a way to get more permitting for housing so young people can afford housing. We need to recognize our economic policies literally allocate wealth from young people to old people. The percentage of wealth that young people control under the age of 40 has been cut from 12% to 6%. These are concerted, deliberate decisions. We did away with the child tax credit. We don't want to make it any easier for people to have kids, but seniors just got their largest cost of living adjustment increase in history. We have made the decision to make it harder and more expensive for people to find each other, for people to mate, and for people to have children. And without children, we turn into Japan and Italy, and that is we go into population decline and our economy goes into decline. We are about to become a society by the turn of the century. There will be 8 times as many people over the age of 60 and half as many kids under the age of 5. Nursery schools will become these strange situations with old people staring through fences at these creatures they don't see in the wild called children. Is this the world we want? Do we want a lack of kids? Do we want a lack of ability to create households? The happiest, most prosperous, most purposeful people in America are middle-class families. And we have made a concerted decision to punch it in the gut and make it harder for that type of family formation. And we're going to lose prosperity and we're going to lose purpose.
I was born in 62, did all kinds of crazy shit, but didn't have to worry about photos of it being online forever. Got laid about average despite being shorter than average. Worked my ass off to get what I got, which isn't a fortune, just normal for my generation. I was educated at a time when the only information was either in books or on TV. It was very hard to get a book published, so it had to be good. Nowadays, any fool can reach millions and tell them the earth is flat. As a young guy, the TV was more responsible. Now it's just propaganda. I feel sorry for the young. I've got maybe 15 to 20 more years to go, and sometimes I can't fucking wait. Shit. I've never had a girlfriend and probably will go my entire life without one too. It's sad, but I've accepted reality for what it is and just thank God for being alive and healthy. I'm 20 and have only had one girlfriend, but it wasn't really a real relationship, just dumb middle school thing. What the hell, bro? But yeah, I've gotten rejected by pretty much every girl I've ever been interested relationship-wise. Probably around several dozen. At this point in my life, I'm focusing more on school, hobbies, and developing my professional career. If CNN is covering this, you know it's gotta be bad. It doesn't take a professor to have predicted this. When I saw jobs leaving the country in the 70s and 80s, I knew it was the downfall of our middle class. Corporate greed is one of the big contributors. And unfortunately, this is such a taboo topic in the mainstream, and we can't really have a real honest conversation. It's so multifaceted, but you have to keep fence sitting. And in order to get in the mainstream and have this conversation, it still has to be pointed at men. It's men's faults in men's direction. Men are economically unviable. Men. You can't begin to critique the women's side of the aisle whatsoever because it immediately gets branded as misogyny. It's the unfortunate truth. So for now, this is as far as the conversation has seeped into the mainstream of men have a problem. And I've seen similar videos like this on other social media like TikTok and Instagram, and the comment section are so much worse. Like when you get to see the brainwashed youth and how they think like, oh, not men complaining, they're not ahead for the first time ever in human history. Oh, men complaining about them in the patriarchy, that's so rich. Like the hate is real. The indoctrination, the social engineering is real. And it's never been this bad for our young people. Every generation has gotten consecutively worse and worse and worse. I mean, this is a question I want to pose for the viewers, the men watching. Ideally, would you like to be married in the quote perfect world? Ideally. And then in reality, how many of you are actually planning on getting married with the current rule set today? I have a feeling that overwhelmingly men would ideally like to get married if the laws were fair, if the women were more traditional. But in the current climate today, almost no man has plans of getting married. I don't know. Let me see. I'm curious to read the comments on this one.